After my husband's death, his uncle tried to take everything. He didn't expect my late husband's $320,000 secret plan to destroy their greed. When you lose someone you love, people always tell you the world will feel different, but nobody warns you about the moment when your own house no longer feels like home. That morning, standing in the wide doorway of the old brick house, I still wore the black dress I had pulled on for Landon's funeral, the hem wrinkled and my hands cold from lack of sleep. The air in the living room felt thick, crowded with shadows and the heavy scent of furniture polish, a scent I would later realize meant someone had been moving things around without my permission. Walter's voice echoed against the walls, a sound that felt both strange and sickeningly familiar. "This property goes back to family blood, Cassidy. Go pack your things." His words struck me like a slap, knocking the breath out of my chest. I blinked, hoping I'd misunderstood, but there he was, standing over by the window, arms folded, a mean little smile pulling at the corners of his mouth. Brent and Wesley, Walter's sons, were already hard at work, hauling chairs and boxes as if they'd been given orders by a general instead of their father. I watched as Brent lifted my grandmother's blue velvet chair, the same one she'd given me when I graduated nursing school, the one Landon used to say made him feel like royalty whenever he read the morning paper. I should have screamed, should have fought, but instead my voice came out steady and strangely calm, as if my anger had frozen somewhere deep in my chest. "You have no right to do this, Walter. This was my home with Landon, and you can't just throw me out." He turned toward me slowly, his eyes cold and bright, and I realized he had been waiting for this moment since the day Landon introduced me to his family. "You're not blood, Cassidy. This house, this land, it all belongs to family. Landon's gone. That's how it is, and you're just delaying the inevitable by standing here in your funeral dress." All around me, the room moved in slow motion. Wesley sliding picture frames into a cardboard box, Brent struggling with the legs of a table, Walter barking orders like the foreman on a construction site. I thought of how, just 24 hours earlier, this same house had been filled with people murmuring condolences, offering casseroles, patting my hand, and saying things like, "If there's anything you need, just ask." Not one of those people had warned me that I'd come home to find strangers, my so-called family, in the middle of stealing my life out from under me. There's something humiliating about being told you don't belong somewhere you thought you'd earned. For 8 years, I'd cooked dinners in that kitchen, painted the front porch every spring, planted wildflowers in the garden behind the garage. Landon and I had argued over paint colors, argued over where to put his battered desk, laughed in the upstairs hallway until we nearly woke the neighbors. In that moment, every single memory felt like it was slipping away, trampled by muddy boots and careless hands. Walter's voice cut through my thoughts. "Brent, make sure you wrap up that lamp. It's real crystal, don't scratch it." He didn't even look at me as he said it, as if I were just another piece of furniture that would be carried out with the rest. I gripped the edge of the doorframe, pressing my nails into the wood until I felt a sting, but I refused to give him the satisfaction of seeing me cry. Instead, I forced myself to watch as they carried Landon's favorite chair, the battered leather one with the torn armrest, out to the driveway and loaded it into Walter's truck without a second glance. "Landon wouldn't want this," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, but Walter heard me. He turned and gave me a look I'll never forget, half smug, half annoyed, like a man swatting away a fly. "Landon's not here anymore, Cassidy, and he was always too soft-hearted about you. We warned him, but he didn't listen. That's over now." The words sank in slowly, heavier than anything I'd felt since the doctor first told us about Landon's diagnosis. 8 years of tense family dinners, 8 years of being talked over and talked around, 8 years of invitations that arrived too late for me to attend. 8 years of being tolerated, never embraced, and always left out of every conversation about what really mattered. I had let myself believe that, eventually, Landon's family would see me the way he did, but in that moment, I saw the truth written plain as day on Walter's face. Behind me, Wesley began stacking my wedding photos on the porch, piling them with old magazines and a chipped vase, as if they were nothing more than clutter in the way of the real inheritance. "You might want to grab anything that matters to you, Cassidy," Brent called out. "Dad says you've got until sunset to take whatever we don't want." I opened my mouth to reply, but found nothing left to say. The anger I felt was like a cold river, steady and deep, but impossible to climb out of. I watched them for a long moment, trying to memorize every detail. The way Walter moved through the living room with authority he'd never earned. The way Brent grinned as he found an old family album and tossed it on top of the boxes. The way Wesley carefully separated anything that looked valuable from the things they planned to leave behind. They'd underestimated me for years, mistaking patience for weakness, and I could feel a hard knot of determination beginning to form inside me. For a brief second, I remembered Landon's words from a few weeks before he died, words whispered late at night when I thought he was asleep. If they come for you, Cass, you stand your ground. Don't ever let them make you feel less than family. I had nodded in the darkness, but I never really believed it would come to this. Now, as the sun slanted through the dusty windows, casting shadows over everything I'd ever called my own, I realized I was completely alone for the first time in my adult life. But being alone didn't mean being helpless. I watched as Brent and Wesley argued over whether to pack up the silverware, as Walter made a show of inspecting the old grandfather clock, as the house that had once felt like my safe place was slowly stripped bare. I promised myself I would not let this be the end of my story. I would not let Walter and his sons erase the life Landon and I had built just because they thought I didn't belong. Not here. Not ever. If you had told me years ago that grief could sharpen rather than numb a person, I wouldn't have believed you. The morning I lost Landon, I thought pain would hollow me out, leave me brittle and exhausted. But instead it was as if every slight and every memory suddenly snapped into brutal focus. All at once, I saw what I had endured since the first day I entered Landon's family's orbit, the unspoken rules and silent judgments that shaped every moment I spent in their presence. When I think back on those years, the thing that still burns isn't how they excluded me. It's how I kept hoping for their approval, kept believing that kindness or patience would buy me a place at their table. When Landon first brought me to his family's house, it was a muggy evening in July, the air humming with mosquitoes and tension that I didn't yet know was permanent. Beverly, his mother, met me at the door with a smile so careful I could hear the hinges squeak. I remember how she leaned forward to straighten a painting on the wall, as if the house itself had to be perfect for my inspection, but later I would realize it was the other way around. She expected me to prove myself worthy of the place Landon called home. That first dinner was a polite war waged with glances and phrases so carefully chosen that they might as well have been dipped in acid. She asked about my family, nodding when I said my father worked at a hardware store, but her mouth pinched a little tighter when I mentioned my mother had never finished college. She smiled when I told her I'd worked through nursing school, but I could feel her cataloging my answers, adding up the deficits. Walter was more direct, never bothering to hide his doubts behind soft words. That same night, over his second glass of bourbon, he asked Landon about the deed to the house and whether it had been properly safeguarded. "The world changes fast, son," he said, "and you can never be too careful about protecting family land." I smiled as Landon changed the subject, but I saw the way Walter's gaze lingered on me, cold and hard, measuring every word. After dinner, I helped Beverly wash dishes, scrubbing at a pan that didn't need it just to keep my hands busy, while she talked about the daughters of her friends and their various accomplishments. "It's lovely you work in the ER," she said, drying a glass with unnecessary force. "But you know, my friend Joan's daughter went to Duke for pre-med, and she's already chief resident." I bit my tongue and nodded, but something in me tightened with every comparison. It never really stopped. From the first family barbecue, where I found myself seated at the end of the patio table beside the neighbor's dog, to the countless birthdays and holidays where Landon's relatives found subtle ways to make it clear I was a guest, not a member. When Landon and I announced our engagement, Walter didn't even pretend to be happy. Instead, he pulled Landon aside after dinner and asked if he'd had a lawyer look over a prenuptial agreement. "Cassidy seems sensible," Walter said, "but the law's the law, and we can't let emotions get in the way of family business." Landon had tried to laugh it off, but that night I lay awake in his arms, feeling the boundary lines of their world drawn sharply around me. People sometimes say you marry a person, not their family, but whoever wrote that never had to sit through Christmas dinner pretending not to hear the snide remarks tossed across the table like breadcrumbs. I learned to be quiet, to choose my battles carefully, and to pick up on the codes embedded in Beverly's compliments. Compliments like, "It's nice that Landon found someone who doesn't mind getting her hands dirty." Or, "Practical girls make for stable marriages, even if they aren't used to houses like this." Every moment felt like a test, but I kept hoping that if I worked hard enough, I might finally be accepted. I didn't understand until much later that the test had always been rigged. 8 years is a long time to live in someone else's home, no matter how many times you pay the utility bills or fix the roof leaks yourself. Every summer, Landon and I would paint the porch together, laughing as we splattered blue on each other's jeans. But when Beverly saw the finished job, she would always point out some tiny flaw, her voice tight with disappointment. "It's a shame you couldn't have found a professional," she'd sigh, patting my arm. Landon always told me not to take it personally, but I saw the way he avoided family gatherings more and more as the years went by. 3 months before Landon died, we went to his cousin's wedding, a stiflingly formal affair in a country club that reeked of polished wood and old money. I wore a green dress Landon loved, but when I walked into the reception, Beverly's eyes flickered and I heard her whisper to an aunt, "At least she tries." The ceremony itself was a blur of white lilies and vows I barely heard. But later that evening, as I went to the restroom, I passed by a knot of Landon's relatives huddled in a corner. Walter's voice was unmistakable, deep, gravelly, and always a little too loud. "When Landon's gone, the property will revert to the family," he was saying, and I stopped in my tracks, every hair on my neck standing up. "There won't be any issues with Cassidy, right?" Brent asked, sounding bored. "We can't afford legal messes." "She's got no claim," Walter replied confidently. "She's not blood. Wives get a bit for their trouble, but the rest comes back to us." Someone chuckled, and I ducked into the restroom, locking the door behind me as my hands started to shake. That night, as we drove home, I watched Landon's face in the streetlights, searching for any sign that he was as shaken as I was. "I heard them," I said quietly, and he squeezed my hand. "Cass, I've known for a long time that they'll never really see you as family. I wish it were different." When we got home, we sat in the kitchen with the lights off and a bottle of cheap white wine open on the counter. Landon reached for the folder he kept hidden at the back of his desk drawer and pulled out a stack of papers. "I've been working with Helen. Remember her from the animal shelter board? She's a damn good lawyer." He explained that after our wedding, he'd changed the deeds to joint ownership with survivorship rights. "If anything happens to me, the house is yours outright. They can't touch it." He showed me his will, a thick packet that left everything: house, savings, and the veterinary clinic, to me, with explicit instructions explaining why. He even handed me a sealed letter, his handwriting precise and careful, that began, "To the people who never made Cassidy feel welcome." I read that letter over and over, my tears smudging the ink, feeling at once fiercely loved and terribly exposed. "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" I asked, and he looked down at his hands. I kept hoping maybe I'd never need to. Maybe if I gave it enough time, they'd change. But he didn't really believe it. That was clear from the way he watched his family at gatherings, his arm tied around my shoulders, his laughter just a little too forced. When the diagnosis came, Landon barely had time to adjust before reality crashed in. He thought the stomach aches were stress or bad takeout, but within weeks he was losing weight, his skin graying and his energy seeping away like water through a sieve. The day the doctor said, "It's advanced. 6 months if we're aggressive," I felt something inside me split, not just from fear, but from the certainty that Walter and Beverly and their boys would pounce the minute they got the chance. If you've never watched someone you love vanish by inches, count yourself lucky. Landon kept his dignity as long as he could, but his family's visits became more frequent and more invasive. Every time they came, I'd catch Brent in the hallway opening closets, or Beverly making notes about which furniture was family pieces. One afternoon, I heard Walter on the phone with a realtor inquiring about the old place out on River Road, as if I were already gone. I learned to stay quiet, to gather evidence, to document everything. Landon made sure Helen updated every document, adding a no contest clause to the will that would cut out anyone who tried to dispute it. "Let them try," he said, his voice thin but full of steel. "You have everything you need to win." In the end, I realized I had never really stood a chance with Landon's family. No matter how many holidays I hosted or how carefully I tended Landon's parents' garden, I was always just passing through their world, not part of it. After the funeral, when they boxed up my wedding photos and called my things junk, I finally understood the full measure of their contempt. That day, watching them pick through my life, I stopped being afraid and started planning. Landon had trusted me to protect what we built, and now it was my turn to fight, not just for a house or a chair or a stack of photos, but for the right to claim the years we spent together as my own. The next move would be mine. Some moments in life feel so surreal that your mind just floats, almost detached from the world around you. And that's how those final weeks with Landon felt. The whole house became a place of shadows and routine, Our days ruled by pain medication schedules, the steady beep of medical equipment, and the steady presence of a family that had already written me out of their story. I clung to those last ordinary moments with Landon, the quiet breakfasts on the porch, the slow afternoons where he dozed with my hand in his, and the rare flashes of his old laugh that still managed to break through the exhaustion. As Landon's illness progressed, his family's visits grew longer and more invasive. Beverly started turning up with casseroles I never asked for, sweeping through the kitchen with her nose wrinkled, as if the whole place needed to be aired out the moment I left the room. Brent and Wesley started showing up, just to help, but their help always meant wandering the halls, quietly discussing which room would be best for Brent's kids or arguing about what furniture would fit in Wesley's apartment. Walter brought a measuring tape and a notepad, striding through the living room and jotting down dimensions with the grim focus of a man surveying a battlefield. By then, I had grown tired of making excuses for their behavior. I followed Helen's advice, keeping my phone in my pocket, taking pictures, and making notes. Whenever I overheard something sharp or suspicious, I wrote it down, date and time included. One afternoon, I found Brent and Wesley in the garage, digging through boxes that held my childhood photographs and Landon's old veterinary journals. They looked at me with something like pity, as if I should have already accepted that the world was moving on without me. The last days were a blur, Landon slipping further away, the house filling with people who looked at me but didn't see me. Even in his weakest moments, Landon noticed. One night, when the house was finally quiet, he squeezed my hand and whispered, "Don't let them take what's yours. Promise me." I promised, though I had no idea how hard it would be. After Landon was gone, everything moved too quickly. Beverly arranged the funeral, informing me of her decisions as if reading from a script. I was told where to sit, what to wear, and which tasks I should handle. During the service, Brent's family filled the front row while I sat in the second, separated from the life I had built by nothing but tradition and thinly veiled contempt. I swallowed my pride, reminding myself that my moment to fight was coming. The very next day, I drove back to Savannah, parking across the street when I saw Walter's truck and Brent's van crowding the driveway. I watched as they carried chairs, boxes, and framed photos from the house, my house, into the van. My hands shook as I dialed Helen's number. "They're here," I said. "They're taking everything." Helen told me not to go inside, not to let them provoke me, just to wait and document everything. Her calm voice grounded me. I sat in my car, snapping photos every time Brent or Wesley crossed the lawn with another load. They didn't see me. They thought I was out of the picture, that my absence meant defeat. When Helen arrived, she moved quickly, striding up the path and calling Walter's name in a voice that didn't invite argument. He tried to bluster, but Helen had documents, copies of the will, the property deeds, and Landon's letter. "Every single thing here is Cassidy's property," she said. "Every box you touch, every piece of furniture, is legally hers." Walter's face paled. Beverly tried to interrupt, talking about family tradition and bloodlines, but Helen cut her off. "The law isn't interested in tradition. You're trespassing, and if Cassidy wants, she can call the police right now." The room fell silent. Even Brent, always eager for a fight, looked unsure for the first time. Helen instructed them to return everything they'd removed, then made a list of every item, checking it off as Brent and Wesley carried boxes back inside. I stood there, numb but fiercely proud, as Helen read Landon's letter aloud. In his clear, careful script, Landon explained exactly why he had left everything to me, recounting the years of slights and exclusion. The words hit harder than anything I could have said. When Helen finished, she told Walter and his sons to leave and not return. "Change the locks tonight," she told me. "If they come back, call me and the police." After they were gone, I wandered the empty house, touching the things I'd almost lost. My grandmother's chair, Landon's favorite book, the crooked photo from our first trip together. Grief and anger warred in my chest, but underneath it all was a deep, undeniable relief. For the first time since Landon's diagnosis, I truly believed I could keep my promise to him. I wouldn't let them erase our life or write me out of the story. I belonged here, and they could never take that from me again. After Helen left that afternoon, the house felt emptier and yet somehow more mine than it had ever been since the day Landon first handed me my own key. The echoes of Walter's outrage and Beverly's hurt pride still clung to the walls, but their voices were gone, replaced by the solid quiet that comes only when you know the battle has finally turned your way. I wandered from room to room, examining every object that had nearly vanished from my life. running my hand along the curve of my grandmother's chair, tracing the edge of Landon's old veterinary textbooks, counting the framed photos I had once feared would end up in someone else's attic. Every corner of the house was a battlefield reclaimed, every box and chair and chipped teacup a flag planted in defiance of people who never thought I deserved any of it. That evening, I changed the locks just as Helen had told me to, the cold click of the new mechanism giving me a sense of security I hadn't felt since Landon fell ill. I didn't sleep much, but it wasn't fear that kept me awake. It was adrenaline, relief, and something close to triumph. The next day, the reality of what I had done settled over me, heavier and more complicated than I'd expected. With Walter and his family out of the picture, there were dozens of details left to manage, notifications to send, bills to pay, messages from distant cousins asking if the rumors were true. I spent hours on the phone with Helen, listening as she walked me through every legal step, every document that needed signing, every formality that could mean the difference between peace and another round of chaos. She was patient and methodical, insisting I keep copies of everything, never letting my guard down, even for a moment. When word spread through Savannah, the response was as swift and unforgiving as summer lightning. People I had never spoken to before stopped me in the grocery store to whisper their opinions, sometimes offering sympathy, sometimes barely veiling their judgment behind a smile. "I heard you really showed them," said one neighbor, her voice tinged with admiration and a hint of fear. Another woman, older and sharper, cornered me at the farmer's market to declare, "Family is family, but the law is the law. Good for you, Cassidy, but be careful. They don't forget easily around here." In those weeks, I felt the city watching, waiting for me to stumble, half expecting the scandal to end with me moving out and the house reverting to its so-called rightful owners. Every time I walked through the front door, I was aware of the eyes peering through curtains and the whispers that trailed after me on the street. I responded by holding my head higher, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing me falter. Landon's voice echoed in my mind, reminding me that this was my home, my fight, and I could not back down now. Walter tried to contest the will exactly as Helen had predicted he would, filing a petition in probate court that landed on my doorstep with a dull, threatening thud. For days, I lived with the fear that somehow, despite everything, he might find a loophole, some crack in the legal wall that would let him pry open the door again. Helen handled the situation with icy calm, showing up at every hearing with folders full of evidence, photos, documents, statements, and above all, the letter Landon had written to explain his choices. The no contest clause in the will was airtight, and when Walter realized that any challenge would strip him of even the chance to receive a single keepsake, his resolve began to crumble. The day the court ruled in my favor was less dramatic than I'd imagined, but no less significant. The judge, an older man with tired eyes and no patience for family drama, read Helen's summary and Landon's letter, then looked at Walter and his sons as if he were seeing straight through them. "The decedent's wishes are clear, the law is clear, and there will be no further arguments in this courtroom," he said, his gavel coming down with a finality that left no room for appeal. I exhaled for what felt like the first time in months, my shoulders sagging as the tension finally began to drain from my body. That evening, as the sun set over the city, I sat in the kitchen and called my brother Max, letting him know that it was over. He laughed, loud and free, and told me that Landon would be proud, that he always knew I was stronger than I let on. I wanted to believe it. Alone in the quiet, I found myself talking to Landon out loud, telling him about the court, the neighbors, the strange satisfaction that came from seeing Walter walk out of the courthouse with nothing but his own bitterness for company. Over the following weeks, life didn't return to normal. Nothing ever does after you lose someone you love and fight so hard just to hold on to the scraps of the world you built together. But it did settle into something new, a quieter and steadier rhythm that belonged only to me. I kept busy managing the veterinary clinic, honoring Landon's memory in small ways, fixing things around the house, and finally unpacking boxes I had avoided for years because they carried too many memories. One morning, a letter arrived from the local animal rescue, informing me that Landon's final gift, a substantial donation from the estate, had allowed them to expand their facilities and offer a new community program for injured wildlife. They wanted me to attend the opening ceremony as an honored guest, to stand alongside the staff and volunteers who had always seen the best in Landon, even when his own family could not. The invitation moved me more than I expected, bringing a lump to my throat and tears to my eyes. For the first time, I realized that Landon's legacy would outlive the bitter arguments and courtroom battles, and that I, too, would be remembered for more than just surviving a family feud. By the time autumn rolled in, Savannah had found new gossip, and the sharpest whispers faded. People nodded at me with something like respect, or at least acceptance, as I walked to the clinic or sat on the porch with a book. I felt Landon's presence less as an ache and more as a gentle, guiding hand, nudging me to keep living, to keep fighting, and to let myself find peace. On the anniversary of Landon's death, I made a pot of tea and sat in my grandmother's chair by the window, reading his letter one more time. The pain was still there, sharper on some days than others, but so was the gratitude for the love I had found, for the fight I had won, and for the home that, at last, truly belonged to me. The first fall after the court's decision was the strangest season of my life, quieter than any I'd ever lived, yet buzzing with the undercurrent of everything that had come before. There were mornings when I would open the curtains and half expect to see Walter's truck parked crookedly by the curb, or hear Beverly's clipped voice echoing down the front walk. But all that remained was the hush of leaves blowing against the old porch and the slow, careful beat of a house that had finally settled. I moved from room to room like someone rediscovering her own territory, touching the edges of the life I'd reclaimed, thinking of Landon with gratitude and sorrow in equal measure. There were moments when grief washed over me like a storm, but I held tight to the knowledge that I had done everything I could to honor his memory and our life together. The town changed, too, in ways both subtle and unmistakable. People who had once eyed me with suspicion now offered cautious greetings, sometimes stopping to share small news or ask about the clinic, their voices laced with curiosity and maybe a touch of respect. I learned that surviving a scandal in Savannah was as much about endurance as it was about the truth, and over time, even the sharpest tongues lost their edge. Some of Landon's old friends returned, bringing memories and laughter to the house that had been so recently claimed and defended. Even Beverly, after months of silence, sent a short letter apologizing for any unintended pain she may have caused, signing it simply B. I read it twice, then tucked it away in a drawer, unsure what to feel beyond a vague relief that, for once, her words could not harm me. Managing the clinic became my anchor, the steady routine of animals and appointments pulling me forward through each week. I threw myself into the work, organizing adoption drives, raising money for rescue cases, and learning the tangled web of small-town business. Sometimes, in the quiet moments after everyone had gone home, I would sit in Landon's old office and talk to him, out loud, as if he might still hear me. I told him about the cases I'd taken on, the puppy who chewed through 2 leashes before finding a family, the old cat who came in for stitches and left with a clean bill of health. These moments brought comfort, the ache of loss softening under the weight of purpose and memory. One unexpected day, a letter arrived from the city's animal sanctuary, not just an invitation to their expanded facility, but an official request for me to join their board as an honorary director. The sanctuary, now named for Landon, had become a thriving part of the community, and the staff credited the transformation to the donation he'd arranged in secret. Their gratitude was overwhelming, and I accepted the position with a mix of pride and humility, feeling as though the world was offering me a chance to become something more than the woman everyone gossiped about. As the months wore on, it was clear that Walter and his sons had not moved on so easily. Rumors reached me that they had tried to start legal action in a neighboring county, only to find every door shut to them thanks to Helen's reputation and the careful wording of Landon's will. The house they'd dreamed of taking for themselves slipped further from their grasp with each passing week, and their absence became another layer of peace that wrapped around the property like a shield. Sometimes, at night, I caught myself listening for the sound of a car in the drive or footsteps on the porch, but the only visitors now were friends, neighbors, and the occasional stray animal looking for shelter. It would have been easy to let bitterness take root, to replay every argument and slight until it consumed all the joy left in the house, but I refused to let them have that power. Instead, I leaned into the life Landon and I had made together, filling the rooms with laughter and light, hosting dinners for the clinic staff, and learning to enjoy the quiet solitude that came with the turning of the seasons. I became someone new in that house, someone stronger and more certain than I'd ever believed possible. I found a new circle of friends in the rescue community, people who cared less about family names and more about the work we could do together. Then, just as the last leaves were falling from the pecan tree in the backyard, something happened that no one could have predicted. One gray afternoon, as I was preparing to leave the clinic, Helen called, her tone urgent but edged with a kind of strange excitement. "Cassidy," she said, "there's something you need to see. Can you come by my office?" When I arrived, she handed me a thick envelope with my name written in Landon's handwriting, a letter and a series of documents I had never seen before. My heart pounded as I sat across from Helen, unfolding the pages with trembling hands. The letter was dated just a week before Landon's death, and in it, he explained that he had made one last change to his estate. After everything he'd witnessed, all the ways his family had tried to erase me, he had arranged for the final portion of his assets, the land behind our house, a stretch of old forest I'd always loved, to be placed in a trust for community use. But there was more. Tucked inside the envelope was a deed transferring ownership of the property, not to me, but to a new foundation, one with my name at the top. Landon wrote, "You always saw what this land could be, Cass. Let them try to take it now. It belongs to you and the city, forever." Tears filled my eyes as I realized the full scope of what he had done. Not only had he protected me, he had turned the final weapon of their greed into a gift for everyone. The land would never be developed or sold, and the family who had spent so long fighting to claim it would never set foot on it again. In a single, elegant gesture, Landon had given me a way to heal, a way to give back, and a way to finally close the door on the past. When the news broke, the reaction in Savannah was immediate and electric. The story ran in the local paper, painting Landon as a visionary and me as the unexpected champion of the city's green spaces. Strangers stopped me on the street to shake my hand. Children drew pictures of the new park, and the mayor invited me to speak at the dedication ceremony. I stood on a makeshift stage under the old pecan tree, looking out at the crowd, feeling Landon's presence in every cheer and every smile. The family, so certain that they could bend the world to their will, were nowhere to be seen, their plans finally and utterly undone. That night, back in the house that was now only and always mine, I made a cup of tea and settled into my grandmother's chair. The letter Landon wrote lay open on my lap, and I read it again, this time aloud, letting his words fill the room one last time. Home isn't just walls or names or bloodlines. Home is where you are loved, where you are safe, and where you choose to stand your ground. As the wind rattled the windows, I closed my eyes and smiled, feeling peace settle over me like a soft blanket. Sometimes, the battles we never wanted become the victories that change us forever. Sometimes, the hardest losses lead us to the places we were always meant to find. And sometimes, the family you lose is the price you pay for the one you create, brick by brick, day by day, in the home you fought to keep.